It may well be that the most important procedure you can learn is that of the performance analysis. One reason is that people are constantly confusing problems with solutions. We've got a training problem. As well, you know, training isn't a problem. It's one of the remedies for the as yet undefined problem. People go to their physician, I've got an aspirin problem. Well, aspirin is not a problem. It is one of the possible remedies for an as yet undefined or non-described problem. So that's one of the uses of the performance analysis. It will help you to identify the nature of the problem, the size of the problem, which will tell you how much you can invest in a solution. It will help you identify the causes, and then it will help you to point yourself in the direction of useful remedies. But there's another reason why the performance analysis is so useful and important. And that is that today we have far more tools in our toolbox than in the days when we only had training. Here's a list of some of those potential solutions. The top item on the list is particularly interesting because very often people aren't performing in the way they're supposed to perform simply because they don't know what's expected of them. They don't know what they're expected to do. They don't know what they're expected to accomplish. So the performance analysis is a very, very useful tool, and it will give you a form of X-ray vision through which you can look at problems and see appropriate solutions. Well, when should you use a performance analysis? Well, when people performance is at issue. When someone is concerned with what people are doing or not doing in the way of expectations. For example, our managers don't get their reports in on time. Or this clerk gives surly service. Or our detectives are too abusive. In each of these instances, we're concerned with what people are doing or not doing. So now, when would you not use a performance analysis? You would not use an analysis of this nature when you're not yet sure that people performance is involved, when you don't yet know whether people performance needs to be modified or improved. For example, production is down 15%. You don't know whether that's because the machinery is falling apart or because of some other reason. Our computers keep bombing. Maybe the software is getting frazzled around the edges, but you don't yet know whether it's an operator problem. Our scrap pile is too high. Again, the problem is posed in such a way that you don't yet know whether people performance needs to be modified. So that's when you would not yet use a performance analysis. Now let me talk about 2 or 3 of the items in the worksheet because it may help you to avoid some of the more common problems. So, if you don't have a worksheet in front of you, go get one while you put me on hold. Let's turn to page 1. The 2 items on page 1 are of particular importance. The first one asks you, what's the problem? Until you know the nature of the problem in as much detail as possible, you haven't got a very good chance of finding the most efficient remedy. So say whose performance is at issue. You can't do this analysis in the abstract, and so you need to identify the person or class of persons whose performance is being questioned. Then describe in as much detail as you can what they should be doing and what they are in fact doing. That will get your head around the size of the problem, or excuse me, around the discrepancy, the difference between what they're doing and what they are expected to be doing. And that gap now represents the problem that you're trying to solve. Next question is it worth solving? Sometimes the problem is so small it isn't worth doing anything about, even though the person who articulates the problem is chafing because of it. I think this is a big problem. Why? Well, because I say so. That's not good enough. So here is where you try to get yourself wrapped around the size of the problem so that you can decide whether it's worth solving. Clue: not all of these items in the left-hand column are going to be relevant for any single performance analysis that you may be doing. They're just there to trigger your mind to think about them before moving on. So ask yourself each of these questions. Does the performance analysis lead to a loss of money? If so, calculate the amount of money lost per year as best you can, and then write that number down here in the right-hand column. Is there time lost? If there isn't any time lost as a result of the discrepancy, ignore it and go on to the next item. But think carefully about all of the sources of the cost of the problem, and then, after you collect a total, write your total in the box on the lower right-hand corner of the page. Now then, the next big issue is this. If the problem is worth solving, are there any quick fixes that you can make? Sometimes the solution to the problem is so obvious you just ought to go and fix it. For example, the light on your desk lamp suddenly goes out. What do? Do you get out a troubleshooting checklist? No, of course not. What you do is you change the bulb, and the light comes back on, and you get on with life. If the light doesn't come back on, you say, uh-oh, I better check to see whether it's plugged in. But those two remedies don't require a lot of thought because they are the most likely ones that will solve the problem. So those are quick fixes that cause the problem to go away, after which you don't have to continue with the analysis. The same is true here with performance problems. So ask yourself these three questions before you go on. First off, are the expectations clear? Sometimes people aren't performing, as I mentioned a moment ago, because they don't know what they're expected to do, they don't know what they're expected to accomplish. And this is usually a problem that's easy to solve. So if they don't know what the expectations are, write down here what you can do to clarify the expectations. In other words, draft a little piece of remedy here, and then be sure to put a check mark in the check mark column. Next, ask yourself whether they've got the wherewithal, whether they've got the stuff that they need with which to perform. Do they have the time, the tools, the authority, the space to perform? If not, identify what they need and then describe how you might provide what they need or how you might get somebody else to provide what they need, and put a check mark there, indicating that you've got a potential solution, and you'll use this when you're collecting your solutions a little bit later on. Thirdly, in the quick fix area, ask whether they're getting feedback. If they don't find out in any way, shape, or form how well they're performing, it's difficult to influence them to perform more accurately. For example, how often do you get feedback about the quality of your telephone answering performance? How you too? Well, there you have it. If you're not getting regular feedback, or if the performers that you're concerned about aren't getting regular feedback, then ask yourself, what do they need in the way of information that will help them perform better, and then how can you provide that, and put a check mark there in that box. And then continue on with the analysis. I just want to comment on page 8, where you begin to select and implement your solutions. What you do here is go back through your analysis and look at all of the check marks, because these have identified potential solutions, and use those as a guide for drafting some possible solutions here on page 8. And now, notice that we've asked you to draft at least 3 possible solutions no matter how bizarre they may seem to you at the moment. The reason for that is that people frequently come to this analysis with a preconceived solution already hardened in their head. And to try to get people to be more flexible about thinking about remedies, we ask you to come up with 3 possibilities. No, we demand that you come up with at least 3 possibilities. So describe those here and make sure that each and every one of your check marks has been accounted for in your solutions, and then calculate the approximate cost of the solution all the way down the page. Now then, you're practically there. Next thing to do is decide which combination of solutions is best. So you would write that under item B. These solutions, ask yourself which one is combination of solutions will be least expensive, which will be most appropriate, and which am I most likely to be allowed to implement. It may not be your favorite solution, but you pick one because it's likely that you can do something about it. And then finally, and this is an important step, draft an action plan. It's one thing to say the president ought to pass a law. It's something else to say how you're going to get him to do that. So here on the action plan section, answer the question for each component of the solution, who's going to create that portion of the solution. For example, if you need a job aid, who's going to create the job aid? And then answer the question, who is going to put that part of the solution into effect? And once you've drafted your action plan, you are ready to move into the implementation phase. Don't underestimate the power of the performance analysis. It's an incredibly useful tool for comparing the what is with the what needs to be, for identifying causes, and for pointing you in the direction of solutions that work. Now be sure before you go on to do 2 or 3 performance analyses and look at the analyses of some of your colleagues. Ask them to walk you through their analyses, and it will help to broaden your experience on the nature of the analyses and the nature of the kinds of situations in which the analysis is useful.